Okay, I think a good place to start this story is about the 5th century, excuse me, the 5th millennia BC, 5000 BC. The people that inhabited the area of Nubia, they called it a Neolithic revolution. And there was a lot of Saharan rock reliefs, mentions of cattle cults, and a lot of them are still around to this day. And actually megaliths, remember Stonehenge is a megalith that Europeans will cite in many times and try to pretend that they somehow predate Egypt, which is completely ridiculous. But actually the megaliths they found at Napta Playa, ironically, I believe were about 2,000 years older than Stonehenge. And they were very complex, and it showed that the society was very much so into astrology and astronomy long before the Europeans had a civilization that was doing so. Also, we see in the 13th dynasty, continuing on, jumping ahead, of course, the first dynasty, Narmer Menzies, Yarjet-Jen, all these early pharaohs who worshipped Horus, the falcon god, also referred to as the hawk god, and there's many forms of Horus, but that's not what this is about. I'm trying to limit the scope of this video to symbols and brief Egyptian history to help you understand how religion evolved. I believe Hinduism goes back some 3,000 years. Okay, what I'm talking about is about 7,000 years ago. Remember, there's phallic symbols in Rome, there's phallic symbols in France and Greece, there's phallic symbols in India, which is part of the Hindu religion. I studied religion in schools in about 3 different colleges, and so going ahead, in the 13th dynasty, it was pretty obvious that these are pharaohs of Nubian ancestry, and that they were kind of, you have to understand that the ancient Egyptians were black, but they were cocky, more so than other African tribes. Other African tribes were more friendly to each other than the Egyptians were to other African tribes. The Nubians were made up of different tribes, 3 distinct groups that archaeologists and anthropologists and scientists constantly reference, but as much as 30 plus tribes made up the Nubian area, which is also called Kush. And in Kush, you had the people such as the Magi, who were accepted into the Egyptian army as scouts and as soldiers. And a lot of this information I'm telling you it's out there, I'm not just making this up, I assure you. But anyway, going back to the symbols, the phallic symbols, the aprons, the pyramid symbols, the symbols of resurrection, there's countless symbols that were stolen from Egypt. And one thing I personally believe that, I heard from a brother named Ray Hagen, is that the stone that the builder rejected was what Egypt, was there's actually stone that's referred to that as in Egypt, that was was supposed to be the capstone to one of the pyramids. Remember, you had the pyramids of Giza, the Hanging Pyramid, Step Pyramid, Saqqara, etc. So, if you look at Masonry now, they have a brother named Mason Knight. He has videos on YouTube, and he's part of a Masonic lodge, which in Southern California and Los Angeles, I believe, called the Temple of Luxor, or the Lodge of Luxor, something along these lines. And a lot of Masons borrow from Egypt, and a lot of Masons in their writings will admit that the Aboriginal people, or the original people of Egypt, were the people who came up with a vast majority of the spiritual knowledge and spiritual wealth. Now, I can go on and on about this, so let's just try to stick to the key points here. Greeks such as Herodotus mentioned Egypt as a place where they got their arts and sciences. There's countless sources for that. There was gold mines in Nubia in the Napata era, and under Tutmosis I, they really settled in this area and really started milking it for its gold. Now, Nub is a word that means gold. There was also the Noba people that conquered Nubia later, around the time when the Romans were there, around the 4th century AD, I believe. And so the Romans would eventually use their superior technology and superior army, because the blacks were divided amongst themselves, and there was queens with a lot of power, there was princes and kings with a lot of power, but it didn't really stand up to the power of Rome. Not because the Romans are superior or white people are superior. It's because if you understand how history played out, you would understand that there was key mistakes made by the Egyptians. There was constant efforts by people such as the Hyksos to take over Egypt. There was people such as Ai and Kamosi and Amosi who fought against and expelled the Hyksos using Nubian soldiers. And there was all kinds of troubles, and they kept them from truly advancing their civilization and keeping up with the European powers that were emerging during the time, such as Greece and Rome, and the Greco-Romans, as they would combine. And they had successfully colonized many places in Europe, including the Germans and other people, the Celts, that they brought into their army. And they had a massive army. They had massive armor. Their technology was pretty advanced, So it wasn't necessarily a fair fight. They didn't beat them because God chose their side. They didn't beat them because they were tougher. They beat them simply because they had superior technology and arguably more military experience at the time. So anyway, the Romans seize the area. They go after Egypt's wheat, their gold, everything else that they can ransack, including their religious ideas. And you see that with Cleopatra and Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. But again, I'm running out of time with this video. So the bottom line is that all religion pretty much comes from Africa, whether you're talking about Jainism or Hinduism, the major religions in India, whether you're talking about Buddhism, Taoism, whether you're talking about Christianity, Judaism, Islam. They all are heavily involved in Egypt. The Muslims, one of the first places that they took after Muhammad was declared a prophet was Egypt. Of course, Jesus hid in Egypt. Of course, the Jews were slaves in Egypt for 400 years, according to the Torah and the Bible. And Moses was a servant for the high priest in Egypt, and he was trained in not all the ancient mysteries, but a lot of them, to the point where, it heavily influenced his culture. There's a reason why there's certain elements of religion that they share in common. Rituals, a belief in the afterlife, the ceremonies, symbolism, and different elements of religion they share in common. And it goes so deep that they share a lot of symbols in common. And so what you have, whether you're talking about the cult of Dionysus, the cult of Diana in Greece and Rome, was people taking the idea of having a cult in the first place, taking the idea of having rituals and ceremonies and temples in the first place from the original land. Okay, the idea of having a holy land, Ptah, it was the holy land of Egypt. Okay, Kemet, the black land, and so on and so forth. So what you have with Freemasonry is that, I don't think it's quite appropriate to say that Freemasons were in ancient Egypt, but the people who started the Masonic ideology come from ancient Egypt. But the term Freemason is something that a bunch of people in England in the 1500s came up with, and they started off in taverns and basically bars, and it spread out and it became popular, and they decided that as part of a movement, just like you have the Dark Ages, part of a movement to kind of downplay the contributions of other people and go through a European Renaissance and to make Europe look good and the Europeans look good, they downplayed a lot of stuff. They persecuted a lot of stuff. There was a sister, her name, I'll put her name in the comments, it slipped my mind right now. She used to teach about the mysteries, and the Christians ripped her apart. They carved the meat off her flesh, and the brother Arius, who was at the Council of Nicaea in France or in Rome, he was told to leave. In some accounts, he was slapped by the Christians because he didn't accept their version of Christianity, and it goes back to the ancient mysteries. He wanted to distinguish between Christ's message and the ancient mysteries and the mythology and the theology of Egypt at the time. I'm already at 10 minutes, so I'm going to end it there, but I hope I gave you a lot of information. Thank you.